Welcome, Ken and Susan. Thanks for joining me today. I'm looking forward to having our discussion on education funding. Before we get into that, I just wanted to recap briefly what we went through in our first two meetings. In our first meeting, as you remember, we kind of sat down and we defined kind of the working relationship between us. During the process, I went through the ADVs and the privacy policy and our compensation policy with you. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. We also discussed your financial goals and objectives, and also the priorities that you have for your family, as well as the expectations you have on this process and what you hope to gain from the process. And that was very helpful to me. Finally, we laid out a list of the data that I would need in order to go through the process with you. And thank you very much for providing that data. I think I have pretty much everything I need to do the work, but I will contact you if there's some missing pieces of information. Finally, in the last meeting, we did a kind of an overview of your financial situation, and the good news was that we found a variety of actions that we could take to increase your cash flow by about $10,000 per year. And as you will see, that'll be very important as you go forward trying to fund the education that you desire for your children. It's a big challenge. 3 children is expensive. But some of those actions to increase the cash flow are fairly simple, things like taking out an FSA account for childcare, increasing your deductibles on some of your insurance policies to reduce the premiums, and possibly even refinancing your mortgage. If you remember, we had a kind of a little list of things to do, and I encourage you to start moving forward on the ones that we agreed on together. So let's jump to the funding, university funding. So the objective was to fund all 3 children's university education at State University at a cost of $23,000 per year, current present value costs, and we assumed a 6% inflation on those education costs and a 7% after-tax return on investments. So those are important things for us. I have laid out on a spreadsheet which you have in front of you what those costs look like. Before I get into that, I just want to let you know that the totals are very challenging. They're big numbers, and that's because the education costs are going up very rapidly, 6% per year. What's good is that you're starting pretty early to save the money for the kids, but it's still a big challenge. And I recommend that we look at all options available to help you fund the education expenses. And that includes things like loans, asset sales. I'll come back to that one. Scholarships. There's lots of scholarships out there that kids might be able to gain. Even part-time employment of the children, so they can contribute to the funding of their education. I think all of those tools will be necessary, and the loans, we can use that to kind of fill some gaps at the end. If we haven't quite gotten to where we want to be, we can use some loans to fill the gaps. Okay, so let's take a look at the spreadsheet. So it's as we said, it's each child broken out independently, and as you can see, the savings required for Brentley is 8 years, $12,500 per year. For Bailey, about $8,000 per year for 13 years, and for Bethany, 16 years, $6,500 per year. And I calculated that by looking at the net present value of what the costs would be. Okay, so I discounted the cash flows that were required when they go to university. So it's obviously a lot more at that time, but I've discounted those cash flows to today, and then calculated how much you would need to save in order to have the appropriate amount of money available to fund the university when the child starts university. So, and that comes to $12,500 a year for Brentley, about $8,000 a year for Bailey, and for Bethany about $6,500. When you add that up for the first 8 years, it comes to $27,000 a year. So it's a big sum of money. Then after that, after Brentley is out of school, it goes down to about $14,500 per year for the next 5 years, and then again it drops after Bailey's out of school to $6,500 per year. These are big numbers, and this is why I think you really need to consider all options. And one of the ones I'd like to talk to you about is an asset sale, and that's to evaluate looking at selling your rental property, which is currently kind of a break-even proposition. And given what you've told me about its location and the prospects for the future, it doesn't look like it's going to be a strong investment vehicle for you. If that's the case, if you still believe that's the case, then selling the property now and taking that money and investing it could be a big help towards getting to the education funding goals. In fact, I just want to take one step back and review with you how I recommend you invest your savings for education. So I've looked at a variety of different tools that we can use, and I believe the best tool for you is what's called a 529 account. And this is an education account which allows you to put a significant amount of money in, pretty much almost anything you need to. However, we will fund it with an eye towards what the gifting limitations are, so that you don't end up having gift taxes to pay. But that's no problem. However, this account allows you to put after-tax money in, and then that money grows tax-free, and so you pay no taxes on the dividends or earnings in that account. And then when you take the money out, if you use it for higher education, you pay no tax on it. So it's a fantastic vehicle for saving for education. And if we have any excess funds in one of the accounts, we can then apply that to the other child. So you can kind of move the money from child to child as necessary. So it's very flexible. It's an excellent tool for you. There's another tool called the Coverdale account, which I looked at, but it's really not going to meet your needs because it doesn't allow significant contributions. It's only really valuable to you if you decided to put one of the children into a private school for primary or secondary education. But for university, the 529 is the tool for you. So to get you off to a faster start in the savings, as I mentioned, I think it's worth considering selling your rental property. And I've calculated for you here on this page, you can see here, what kind of net gain after tax you would get from a sale, given the value you told me earlier. And that it would roughly generate about $77,000, which is a sizable sum of money and a great start in terms of saving for education. It would pretty much cover the first 3 years of education funding. I think it's really worthwhile doing that, especially if you think that it's, the value of the property is not going to go up. Then you're just taking risk waiting, and it's probably better to take the value out of that property and get it invested, earning tax-free for the kids' education. As on top of that, though, we'll have to start to identify sources of funds from your earnings and from the savings that we talked about earlier that you can then allocate directly to the 529 account in the years going forward in order to fund the education. It's a big challenge, which is why I believe we may need to look at a variety of tools. And we can use loans to cover some of the gaps, but I think having the kids explore and evaluate getting grants or scholarships is also very worthwhile. So just to recap, the funding needs are roughly $27,000 a year for 8 years, $14,500 for 5 years, and then $6,500 for 3 years. That can be pretty much fully funded in the first 3 years if you sell the property. Otherwise, we're going to need to spend some time finding a way to allocate a significant amount of after-cash funds from your earnings to go towards the education funding in the 529 account. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer those for you now, but you can also contact me later with any questions you've got on the education funding. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.